Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and welcome everybody. I can see everyone in tiny little squares. Good morning from Los Angeles. It stopped raining, so it's nice and bright, sunny, streaming out there. And good morning to our New Zealand friends, Diana and Anastasia down in way down there. Very early morning. Good evening to those of you in the UK, and good afternoon to our New York friends. So welcome to our little celebration of our book launch of Screening Love and War in Troy, Fall of a City, that I co-edited with Antony Augoustakis. So Antony, you can say hi to everybody as well, just to make sure that you're there.
Yes, I have to mute and unmute myself because there's noise in this building. Good morning, good whatever in all time zones. Good to see everyone. Happy to have you here, and Derek Wax also on the other side of the pond. Monica will give some guidelines on how we're going to handle this, and then we can start talking about the book.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out the guidelines as we go. So first of all, I want to thank the organizers of the Antiquity and Media Studies Conference, Meredith Safran, Roger McFarlane, and Dan Curley, who are also here. Dan, of course, is one of the contributors to our book, who opens up the first chapter, or the first official chapter in the book. I want to thank Filippo Carla and Martin Lindner, who are the series editors for the Imagine series at Bloomsbury Publishing in London. They were really great to work with, and they were really open to, moving into some really fun new projects. With all this great new content, this ancient world themed content that's coming out now especially on streaming platforms. Still a couple of movies, feature films here and there, but mostly we're getting a lot of stuff on streaming now. So I want to also welcome Derek Wax, the executive producer for the show, whose company Wild Mercury Productions produced the show and oversaw the writing and so forth, and the production of the show. Antony and I were really fortunate to get in touch with Derek, and that was one of the sort of unintended good consequences of the pandemic, that when the project got slowed down a little bit, we were able to sort of sit back and consider some various options. And one of them was that, ended up putting us in touch with Derek. And so we were able to talk with him and to get a wonderful foreword to the book, which is the first time in all the many books that Antony and I and many of you out there have done, that we have worked on together. And it's the first time we actually got, a creative production, individual to actually talk about their production. Now, good one, Dan. Oliver Stone reacted to his to the book that he read. So
and also Derek was kind enough, as Monica said, to chat with us over Zoom, and also provide images to some images for the book, high resolution. So yeah, we're grateful to Derek.
My pleasure.
Okay, so I just wanted to start off by saying that, I'm like, who are you talking to? I just wanted to start off by saying, we met yesterday for another book launch for the Ancient Epic, the new book from Edinburgh, and it got me to thinking, about the concept of epic and formats and so forth. And so before I turn it over to the contributors to talk a little bit, starting with Derek, if he wants to talk a little bit about his contribution as well. But what Antony and I, we worked on the HBO Rome series. We did a book together on the Spartacus series, and what we really didn't realize until we saw Troy, Fall of a City, and one of the reasons we loved it so much is that we saw this format, the series format, right? The 8-hour format that we're all, we all get to enjoy so much, sort of long form streaming. And there's been some critical comments comment about, what they call Netflix bloat, right? Where stories are stretched beyond, beyond necessity, and things become sort of, just too much. But for our stories, which I refer to as our stories, for the ancient world stories, for epic narrative, the long form, the series form is actually great, right? So instead of like in the Troy movie, in Peterson's movie, where there's, whole characters and storylines that are just thrown out, or they're combined, they tend to be female characters, right? They get all combined. Well, in Troy Fall of the City, they had the luxury, you didn't have to worry about the runtime a little bit. And of course, an actual producer can tell us how that works, but there's no ad breaks. There was the creative intention as well as the generic format to allow them to tell the story, with the backstory, with the tragedy material, the epic material, the origin stories, the postscript stories, right? That little Hellenistic details that I'm sure that the historical consultants helped them with, but all of that stuff, all of that wonderful, detail and character development, all of that was able to be included, given the long form series format. So, in reception, we continue to ask the same questions. How do the receptions engage with the ancient stories? How do the receptions engage with earlier receptions? But also, I think an important question for us to ask is how do the formats also engage with, modern concerns, social, political, character development, all of that? How is that sort of expanded or complicated, maybe, if you want to use the word that we're never supposed to use, problematized? How does that get enhanced in the series format? So that's why we wanted to do the book. Most of you, all of you contributors, address that in some way, the way, character, costuming, presentation of narratives, reception and so forth, how all of that was affected by having the longer format. So Antony, did you want to add to something about that?
No, I was going to say that Monica and I discussed how we want this to go. And since we have a lot of our contributors here, we thought that maybe take a minute or so to give the nutshell, the sales pitch, as we call it, of your chapter, and so that we have time for discussion. And we'll hear from Derek as well, who wrote the foreword, as Monica said. Does that sound okay, Monica?
Yeah, it sounds great to me. I don't know, Derek, would you like to go first, or do you want to wait to hear from other people and you can put names to chapters?
I haven't prepared anything, but I can certainly just say, just speaking to that point about the length, certainly it was commissioned by BBC One originally as a 6-part series. And I remember very much David Farr and I going in for a meeting to persuade them to extend it to 8, because David felt he needed 8 to tell the full, once he began, because we developed originally just one script, and knowing that we wanted to go right back to the origin story, we weren't just going to go straight into the Trojan War, but we wanted to have the origin story of Paris and everything. That David felt we really needed 8 episodes, and I remember trying to persuade, and we did persuade BBC to. This is before Netflix came on board, because they only came on board about 8 months later or 9 months later. But BBC had greenlit it as an 8-part series at our request, and I think that they quite rarely do 8-part series, or at least they did at that time. It was late 2015, I think, when it was commissioned. But so we were quite lucky to get an 8-episode series order, which I think Netflix were very happy to co-fund it on that basis. But we needed that epic length and trajectory to be able to tell the full story of that we wanted to tell, and to be able to go into the amount of detail and character journeys that we wanted to, all of which was obviously sourced from the epic narratives, but not all from Homer, of course. And we had to explain to quite a few people who didn't know the source material that we were not just taking the Homer version, and which is obviously from a shorter span of the war, but we were trying to make a new thing, which was going to be informed by the whole, as much as possible of the narrative. There were many narratives that we couldn't actually. Now, some of the classical scholars amongst you will remind me, but there was a character that I think Odysseus left on the islands, Philoctetes, That was very much in episode 2, and we just felt that that got cut in the, at some point at the script stage. We just felt we actually had more story than we could tell in eight episodes. So even then we had to make some fairly brutal choices. Just talking to that point about the length, which did afford us, the luxury of being able to tell a much longer story than was in the Wolfgang Petersen film.
So when you started with BBC One then, and they usually do a 6 episode, and this was before then Netflix came aboard, was that part of the pitch to say that this will be more appealing to a co-commissioner like Netflix if it's a little bit longer? Or I'm just curious what the industry conversation is like, or you just did it on the basis of the material?
Netflix were only just ramping up their UK co-productions. We were one of the very first, actually, that we didn't know. We knew we'd need a big budget, but we went out to the marketplace. Really, Netflix, we met them in LA in July 2016, and they seemed to come on board straight away. So it was almost like they leapt at it, and we didn't have to. The BBC were not thinking about co-fundability. I think they were just. David had just finished writing The Night Manager, so he was quite hot at that point, and I think they wanted to give him, we made a persuasive pitch for it being 8 episodes to fully realize the story, and I think that's what they responded to, the argument that we needed 8 episodes to fully tell the story.
Well, I must say then, if there's going to be another series, that makes sure that Tom Hiddleston is in it. As you know, he is a classicist, and he can pronounce Greek very well, as all of us know, and I find him to be a compelling presence on screen. I don't know about the rest of you. So why don't we just? I know some of you have written to me and said that you were a little shy. Nobody actually wrote to me and said that, but I thought that would be funny to say. A couple of you did not want to speak, but most of you do. So why don't we just take volunteers? I mean, the way we did this, the way we organized the book, I don't want to ruin things by screen sharing, but we have 3 sections in the book. A section that sort of addresses epic ideas. So Dan, you can go first since you were the first. Such as, the gods and sort of, issues that arise from the use of the epic material. We have a 3rd section, which deals with the use of the tragic material. We have a center section that deals with more sort of production issues, casting, costume, things like that. And then Diana Burton wrote us a beautiful epilogue about the very nuanced and the use of sources, which of course I think several of us were very pleased by and intrigued by. And as you heard Derek just say, they even had more. Now I feel even more sad for Philoctetes.
Yes.
Left on
where is Philoctetes?
Where is poor Philoctetes, still waiting for his epic. So Dan, why don't you go first? And remember, let's keep it real short.
Yes.
So that if Derek has a comment, we're happy to have him here, and we don't get to talk with producers that often. So if you do your bit, and Derek, if you want to respond, just raise your hand, and Roger will spotlight you.
Yeah,
go ahead, Dan.
I get the job. Otherwise, it'll become way too episodic. And that was really my chapter was really about thinking about ways of packaging epic, both in antiquity and modernity. And I basically had 2 theoretical starting points. One is that we live in an age of complex television. I think that's the term of Jason Middle in his book, Complex TV, which allows us to think about sophisticated viewing communities in the 21st century, which might very well resemble the kinds of reading and viewing communities we had in antiquity, that level of sophistication matching. And the other proposition was just that reception is a 2-way street, as you were saying, Monica. I think we can talk productively about packaging epic in antiquity, but I think when we start talking about packaging epic in modernity, that conversation also might help us think more about the way it happened in antiquity. So I basically talked about 3 different kinds of units. One is the episode, which doesn't mean in antiquity what it means for us. There's a whole history of Aristotelian interpretation, which talks about episodes in tragedy and episodes in epic. And in epic, they're not really regarded as the main plot. They're sort of add-ons to the plot, which actually make epic a little bit longer. It's only in the 20th century that episode comes to mean the unit by which we parcel out a show or a program for serial consumption. So episode for us is sort of the main event. So that brings me to the idea of the book, which Antiquity is good because that implies authorial intent, at least in later epics. When we think about the way that an author can shape the composition of a book, but also shape the transitions from one book to the other. And that gets us thinking maybe about the idea of showrunners and the work that they have to do in, as Derek was saying, parceling out an entire epic cycle for 8 consecutive episodes. And then that brings me finally to the idea of the cycle as a unit for organizing epic on the macro level and how epics respond to each other, not just the Iliad and the Odyssey, but the entire cycle as a whole, which deals with events both before and after the Iliad. So I would think that Troy Fall of the City is both cyclic in its attention to that material, both the Iliadic kernel, but also the stuff that comes before and after, and also hopefully the prospect of a sequel series, which will then give us an even more type of cyclic ambition to the series. That's my time.
Thanks, Dan. Oh, Antony, go ahead.
No, I was gonna think that was so well done
Well, I really love the idea. I mean, obviously for us as reception, people, receptionistas, I love this concept of the sophisticated viewing communities, which are becoming more and more sophisticated, right? Just, outside of whatever little scholarly groups there are, there, vast stretches of audience out there, looking for compelling, content. So yeah. Did anyone want to respond to Dan? Just put your hand up. You'll go to the front, or just pop in.
Anastasia wanted to go next, I think. So.
Oh, okay. So where are you, Anastasia? Go ahead.
Oh, good morning, everyone from Auckland. I was just actually thinking that I've heard from fellow colleagues that the series has been a big hit with their students, and already people are writing essays, and they're eagerly awaiting the book as an addition to their bibliography. So Antony and Monica, thank you so much. I think this has been extremely well timed despite the usual challenges of the academic publication process. So that was my a little comment to talk a little bit about what I did for my chapter. It was so much fun to go back to my material on Ajax, the tragic hero and his reception on screen that I'd worked on before, but with new, actually, direct material drawing, particularly obviously from the Iliad. What was really interesting was that the series itself, I kind of saw it, well, obviously because I'm a tragedy person, more as a kind of a tragic narrative, and I saw that in the title, Fall of a City, that kind of has tragic connotations, I think. But what's really interesting to me is that once more, poor Ajax doesn't get that that kind of complexity, and I don't mean this in a critical way. I was more like, oh, why doesn't he get that kind of extra complexity? Why is he always the strong man, the muscle man, without the sort of tragedy that Sophocles brings to the table? The question of his suicide and how that has been connected in modern times with war trauma and PTSD. That's the kind of current state of the discussion on Ajax and his reception on stage. So I found my answer again, the reception of a reception, by going back to the cinematic receptions of Ajax in the 20th century and seeing how that linked up with the reception of the Greeks in more generally in this ancient story of the Trojan War. And they've become, I think, increasingly the villains of the piece, which is kind of really interesting as to why that kind of decision has been taken. And kind of I see a through line from Ellie, kind of in silent cinema, all the way through the kind of the 50s and into the 20th century. Not true of all characters. It was certainly Odysseus and I think it gets a very interesting treatment, very complex character, but not Ajax, and not actually the only common soldier we have appearing from the Iliad, Thersites, who kind of is black as the villain. So I was very interested about that kind of creative decision and why that came to be. So yeah, just to finish up, it was a fantastic project to work on, and thank you to our editors. Can't wait to get my copy of the book.
Thank you,
Anastasia.
Faristopoli. January, we are told January, you know, Bloomsbury is, well, everybody's working on that.
And Anastasia is right, and I think that our contributors did an excellent job in discussing the complex characters that we have in this series, as Anastasia said, from Ajax to Odysseus to Thersites, what we call, you know, in canonical terms, the minor characters. This was a great, all the contributors did a great job discussing aspects of these characters. I think Rebecca had.
Oh, I think it's Rebecca. Yeah. Did you want to jump in? Hi, Rebecca.
Hello.
Hi,
how
Rebecca.
are you all doing? So sorry, I'm just going to adjust my view. I don't like looking at myself while I talk.
I don't either. Roger keeps spotlighting people. So Rebecca, as all of you know of Rebecca's work on especially race and ethnicity in the ancient world, Rebecca had the very challenging task, and she rose to the challenge of writing up the incredibly, the incredibly intense racist backlash to the casting in the show. And we've talked at great length with Derek about this, Rebecca, and it bears out a lot of what of your analysis. So, you might actually have some questions for him and he'll have some questions for you, but we'll try and keep this. I mean, this is like a really interesting part of the whole project. So why don't you go ahead and tell everybody what you wrote about, and then I'm sure Derek might want to add something to that.
Yeah, so my chapter was actually, so as many of you know, I do a lot of work on both what the ancient world looked like in terms of its ethnic diversity and what it means to talk about race in the ancient world, and sort of pushing back on the notion that the ancient Greek and Roman world is a northern white European space that is actually part of a long history of racist narratives that date back into the 18th century. And one of the things that you have to deal with when you deal with things like Homer, for example, is that Homer sits very much in the wheelhouse of the spaces that one of the spaces that people claim as both it's not a myth to them, it's an actual history to them, and it's a way that they lay claim to the ancient past. And so one of the things that, of course, we saw when the show came out is a lot of aggressive pushback, specifically on the character of Achilles, not a lot of pushback necessarily on Zeus or Athena or some of the others, but Achilles. And so I was trying to, the obvious first round thing is that obviously this is a white supremacist backlash because there's a lot of debate over, oh, look, they say Achilles' hair is blonde. Well, that word means shining as well. It doesn't actually mean blonde. It means more closely to shining, which could simply be about divinity, etc. And they try and push back and say, oh, he has to be a blonde-haired, blue-eyed white dude. And that's the obvious first push. But as I started reading through some of the comments and started seeing what was going on and who was making comments and where, more importantly, I think where the conversations diverged, is you start to see this problem with one, audience expectation about what the ancient world is supposed to look like based on hundreds of years of history of how we as scholars and also as popular representations have presented them. And two, who believes they have stakes in who they are as historical creatures as opposed to mythical texts and figures. And then finally, why they lay the claims that they do. And so I was trying to dismantle these sort of different things and figure out what was going on, because you immediately have argumentation taking off in the direction of one, Greek nationalists, and the question of Macedon, and is Achilles, is he Macedonian, is he Greek, right? So that's sort of one facet. Then you have the problem of, we immediately start seeing arguments, repeated arguments, well, if Black people want to lay claim to the ancient world, why don't they just make a movie about Shaka Zulu? and you start seeing this sort of distinction as if the Mediterranean is cut off from blackness. And so you see this sort of heavy anti-blackness that inhabits these commentaries. And they get really nasty, and not just nasty, but in some cases like traumatic, right? And so why do people lay claim to them so much? And why do these specific strands of argumentation for ownership of Achilles play out the way they do in such a vicious and horrifying manner? So that was one of the other threads that I was trying to pull out and trying to figure out. And my hope with the chapter was simply to explicate some of these problems so that when we see these backlashes, we don't actually dismiss them, but actually try to understand them, because it's really important for us to understand how we have and how we continue to package the ancient world, how these audiences, because these are, there are large audiences who doesn't even cross their mind that these are myths and not history. And then, so how do we interrogate our own role in creating this backlash against creative new representations of these old stories? So that's what I was sort of trying to get at. I kind of narrowed the pool on what I would deal with, because some of the material that was on the internet was so disgusting that I simply couldn't bring myself to watch the YouTube videos or other things. But also a lot of these are ephemeral. They're on Twitter, they're on Facebook, they disappear. And so how is there a way to document this before it disappears and no one is held accountable for it? So that was my goal.
You did a great job, Rebecca, in documenting that, and getting some of that down. And I remember talking to you about this, about, just how much material you would engage with and what you chose not to engage with just for your own, mental health. But I actually wanted to see if Derek wanted to make a comment about this, if it actually isn't too painful to mention.
Well, no, I think it showed the power of the social media that, you see, I think that some of these comments were, first of all, framed as though they were part of an intellectual or philosophical debate about whether or not there were these certain nationalities or ethnicities were present in, the ancient world, that whether it could have, Achilles could have been a black person or not. But then we realized that actually it was coming from a very different place. It wasn't really coming from an attempt to understand any sort of authenticity. It was coming really from a racist place, because the fury of the comments became so vicious. I mean, our casting director was getting death threats. We were having all sorts of things. It may have been coming from a very small group of people hiding under the anonymity of Twitter and Facebook sort of anonymity. And but what they were trying to do was to bring down the show, trying to encourage people via YouTube videos and things to give it 1-star ratings. So we had hundreds of 1-star ratings before anyone had even seen the show. And even now, you talk about ephemerality, but of course we were actually, when shows are seen on things like IMDb or Rotten Tomatoes, people think, was the show well received? These racist commentators have actually succeeded in a way, because it's seen as a free place where people can give their own subjective views, which are then aggregated on these sites. So it did actually affect people's, how it was seen in the public gaze. And it really had been manipulated essentially by those people deliberately to sort of, to negatively affect the show's rating, all based on the fact that they were hated the idea of a black Achilles and a black Zeus, actually. That did come into it quite a bit. So it was quite hurtful, and certainly for the actors involved, very hurtful. And we were encouraged by the BBC not to respond, which I don't think was a particularly, now in retrospect, was a very rational response. That they thought that we would only create more of a story by responding to it. So we were sort of told basically to allow it to fizzle out. But it meant that debate never really happened very much from David Farr and my point of view. We weren't able to really engage in that and really sort of put these people to right. Not that they would have listened necessarily, but the idea was just to somehow allow it to blow over. Which anyway, I do think it was it it was quite dramatic at the time to have the show so reviled by people who hadn't even seen it for that reason.
I don't think that many people, unfortunately, in the world we live today, death threats have become so easy nowadays, from vaccines to, you name it, politics. And I don't know if they would have necessarily listened or what the point of debate is anymore. I think that that's something I've long debated about, the use of debate. But I think also in relation to what Rebecca excellently discussed with Black Achilles, related to that is also what Walter and Tom were discussing about the queerness of Troy, queer Achilles, Patroclus, etc. And I think those two are related because a lot of backlash was about Achilles being gay or bisexual, right? So maybe I see Walter has his hand up, so maybe.
Yeah, and I mean, we can move on. Let's move on to Walter and then Tom, if you wanted to jump in as well. You know, one of the reasons we wanted to bring this book forward is because, you know, we just loved the show so much, and we knew people that loved the show, other classicists, our students, as Anastasia mentioned, and you know, this review bombing that Derek described, you know, coming out of the you know, that racist backlash that Rebecca writes about, you know, it really does, you know, it has persisted, right? There still isn't a Region 1 DVD of the show, right? Because, you know, people, you know, the business people think, oh, okay, well, this didn't do so well or whatever. So we're hoping that our book will have a little bit of a, you know, an effect of bringing this back into people's consciousness. And 3 years later, you know, we can rethink some of the excellent points about the show. So Walter, why don't you go ahead? Talk about Amazons.
So where were the Amazons in Wolfgang Petersen's 2004 Troy? Not to be found, right? Imagine if Brad Pitt had come out and single-handedly fought off a host of Amazons, right? And Angelina Jolie, dressed as Penthesilea, came out when a sea of Amazons parted and, you know, had a duel with Brad Pitt. Well, it would have ended in a love scene. But anyway, that Brangelina moment has passed, but Troy Followed the City, I was very grateful to see included the Amazons. And in my chapter, I discussed, you know, how the epic cycle and some later Trojan War epics had been included to some extent, but yet also modified. I think some of the worst parts of those epics have been kind of changed, you know, especially the part where Achilles kills Penthesilea and then falls madly in love with her. And, you know, that's a bit weird. But what I really did appreciate about the Troy Fall of a City series is how Penthesilea was presented in a very modern way with a very butch haircut. I also found it very interesting how the Amazons did not have helmets, right? And I was very curious about that. And so, but it kind of showed them off in a certain way, which I thought was very nice. And also Penthesilea's character development is something that I talked about, how she's there for revenge, which is different from the epics, and revenge against Achilles for killing her daughters and sisters. And then I was also very interested in how the epic, at least the way that I saw it, kind of borrowed a few interesting and I think nice parts from Wonder Woman, right? Including, of course, the multiracial Amazons, going back to what Rebecca was saying, but also the idea that Paris sort of dives into the world of the Amazons, you know, not into a body of water like Steve Trevor per se, but into a shallow creek, but that becomes a body of water, sort of signifying his death and transformation back to life as Aphrodite revives him. So, and those were the things that I found of interest. That's
really interesting. I love all your thoughts and comments about Penthesilea. We really wanted to give her a really, as much of a role, a substantial role as we could, because, you know, she's a terrific character, and we felt we also wanted to have more. Helen's role we could not have really developed further than we did, we thought, because of her, you know, in terms of the actual myth, there wasn't maybe enough to really take her through some of those later episodes, apart from the last two. But Penthesilea, you know, as a fighting woman, was a really great person to have alongside all those fighting men. But that's really interesting. The borrowed from Wonder Woman, I think Wonder Woman came out after we did, and I'll have to check that. But I don't think Wonder Woman had come out when we were developing our show.
I see. Thank you.
But yes, yeah, maybe they borrowed from
That's
us.
good to know.
Well, not so much, maybe not Patty Jenkins' film, but the idea of Wonder Woman as an Amazon. She's sort of the pop culture Amazon that most people, most people would recognize. And so there's a kind of a through line of receptions there between Amazons and Wonder Woman that goes back to the comics. Yeah, all the way back. So how about you, Tom? Are you ready to pitch in a little bit about your chapter?
Yes, I am ready to pitch in. So when I last saw Monica in the before times in Texas, she mentioned that she was working on a volume on Netflix, Troy Fall of the City. Had I seen it? Did I have any thoughts? Anything I might want to talk about? And I said, the scene on the beach. I want to write about the scene on the beach, because I, like most of us on this Zoom, are steeped in reception. We think about receptions of the Iliad or the classical world a lot. I am difficult to surprise, but that love scene on the beach surprised me. And I wanted to think more about it, what was going on, what were some of the choices that were being made, and how that factored into the larger arc of the Orientalism or not, of the way Troy was figured as a place of sexual freedom. And I made the argument in the chapter that this was a queering, which isn't a word that I throw out very often. I think queer is overused, but that really does dissolve boundaries, the three-way kind of love relationship between Briseis, Patroclus, and Achilles. And so that's what I wrote about. To me, it leapfrogged over sort of traditional representations, like in the last 150 years, of Achilles and Patroclus as gay, and went into really a different modern configuration of sexuality, one that resonated with, and this pops up in some of our conversations today, with a certain segment of social media, and I talk about that as well.
Yeah, well, just from our point of view, it was really, really key to give that full expression as much as we could, the gayness or bisexuality of Achilles, and the sexual freedom of the time, and the sort of the fact that those things were not deemed in any way, whatever the word is, sort of there wasn't any hang up about any of that during that period, as far as we were aware, and that therefore there was a sort of sexual freedom, and that's who Achilles was, and that's who Patroclus was, and that was the closeness of their relationship. And of course, it's a very loving relationship, which affects Achilles terribly strongly when Patroclus is killed. So we felt it was necessary for the whole development of that story and for Achilles' fate that Patroclus and he that we made proper that we fully explored the bond between them.
But one really interesting addition obviously to that whole sequence is Briseis, and the fact that she's the last image that we see as one of the survivors. I think it helps you read, go back and read the beach scene in a certain way, I think too. So I'm not sure we had much room to write too much about Briseis, but I would like to see her talked about a little bit more too. So go ahead.
No, I just thought she was a wonderful character, and when we realized we had such a good actress to play her, we wanted to give her more, and I think the idea of having her at the end as the only survivors, really, apart from the Greeks who have disappeared, of the sort of the Trojans that left, to really focus on people who had not been great, famous characters, but had been the ordinary people, of which she clearly is one, a prisoner of war and also the small boy, and just to sort of see it from the point of view of the civilians, of the ordinary people somehow, that would be actually more emotionally affecting to do that.
Yes, and Briseis is sort of a hot property lately, right? That Pat Barker just came out with I'm not sure exactly when it came out, the Silence of the Girls, with Briseis as a main character. So it's kind of an interesting. There are a lot of these rereadings of Troy. I think that all kind of go together, reinterpretations. Well, so checking on the time, I see Krishni, I see you have your hand up. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your chapter, and we can put it in the context of these the sort of more tragic resonances that we have seen as part of the show, with the series format allowing them to use so much more material than a feature film.
I would be delighted. So, like Tom, my chapter came out of a moment of surprise when I was watching the series for the first time. And that was the choice to replace baby Telemachus during Odysseus's introduction with a baby daughter, which means that we have three fathers of daughters who are confronting the idea of sacrificing Iphigenia, Agamemnon's daughter, in episode 2. And from there, I started thinking about the relationships between these fathers and daughters. Hermione is a favorite character of mine who never gets to be in anything outside of the classical world. And this show in particular did a beautiful job experimenting, I guess, with what it would be like to be the daughter of Helen of Troy. And also just the really kind of powerful and yet brief, succinct way that this series treats the sacrifice of Iphigenia, which is so deeply sensitive and also so incredibly accurate to the texts that have survived. So what I ended up doing with kind of these three daughters and their relationships with their father is thinking about how the father's willingness to metaphorically or literally sacrifice their daughter to kind of suit their own desires, their own pursuits, ended up being, I guess, a reflection, a foreshadowing of the kinds of leaders they would be as kings and as leaders of the Greek side of the war. And the short version is Odysseus starts out as a pretty good leader. He is unwilling to sacrifice his daughter in order to stay home. Agamemnon is willing to sacrifice his daughter, although it is a very difficult choice for him, and he ends up being a terrible leader. All things considered, almost all of his poor decisions are sort of born out of the trauma of this experience. And Menelaus is perfectly willing, in spite of his pride in his daughter, to first give her to the Trojans, and then, had she been called for, to sacrifice her literally in place of Iphigenia. And he's no leader at all.
Thanks, Krishni. I loved your chapter, and that was another question, right? That the series allowed us the luxury and the creative intention to explore what it was like to be Helen of Troy's daughter, right? Could you imagine? And I'm sure Derek can also respond to the type of response that viewers gave to the Iphigenia episode, right? It's episode 4, isn't it? The end of episode 4, and and I know Amy can talk about that a little bit as well. But just all the sort of warnings and stuff, people were really, viewers were like Agamemnon, traumatized by the scene. I don't know, Derek, if you wanted to say something about it, and then Amy, you can talk about your interpretation as well.
I think the death of Iphigenia was episode 2.
Sorry.
I think, yeah, but no, I thought all those comments were brilliant. That observations were superb. We really wanted Hermione to be an interesting character, and I think we found a good actress who was able to. I mean, it's there in the script, this sort of sense that she does not. She finds her mother selfish, and she's not a mother who. We thought this was quite interesting. Not, how do you defend a mother running off with a man to another country and leaving a daughter behind? And it was quite an interesting, complex. We thought, it's an interesting, complex relationship between Hermione and Helen that we try to do our best to make as nuanced and subtle as possible. Certainly, Hermione has does not defend her mother as her mother's actions. But I thought, Iphigenia was a tragic story that we had to to do. It's a very painful scene to and sequence actually to film because of the brutality. And absolutely, it does begin to define Agamemnon as a man, and he never really recovers from making this terrible decision. This was partly about making sure that we were always looking at the psychological realism, hopefully, of the terrible decisions that were made, even if they were sort of ordered by the gods, that we were looking at the human consequences and really trying to get under the skin of the emotions and psychology of the character whenever we could. So I suppose what we were trying to do with Iphigenia and with Hermione.
And I think
oh, go ahead, Antony.
Amy is next to talk about, I guess, Iphigenia.
Iphigenia, yeah.
Sure. No, this is so great to hear. I love having this discussion. Yeah, so I kind of approached it I approached Iphigenia from a kind of similar angle. But instead of sort of looking at her with other young women, I was sort of looking at her comparing to Helen. And again, it all came from a place of the show and the way that there was this, cross-cutting of these scenes of Helen's arrival at Troy with Iphigenia's death scene. And it was this very jarring, right? You're jumping back and forth between these traumatic scenes of Iphigenia's sacrifice, her death, with these very kind of gentle and softer scenes of what kind of amounts to sort of a marriage scene, right? Helen's arrival at Troy, meets the family, consummation of her marriage, of her love with Paris for the first time on Trojan soil. And so it just felt as though these, these two stories were being told intertwined, as though we had some kind of, some kind of calculus, an evil calculus had to be done in order for Helen to be able to have this second chance at a marriage. And so in a way, she's kind of, replacing, I guess, the role of a young woman, herself no longer a young woman. She's an interloper into the space of marriage. And so therefore, we kind of had to sacrifice Iphigenia in order for that to happen. Iphigenia's chance at a marriage, Iphigenia's chance to, enter into the sphere of a married woman. And I just found that so interesting. And I had a lot of fun going back to Euripides and looking for moments where Iphigenia and Helen were also mentioned kind of in tandem. And there are shades of that there as well. And I just had never really thought about that relationship between the two women. And so I just really appreciated how the series treated that. And I thought it was really fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
and that was in the script. That wasn't. That didn't come from the edit. That was in the script. The juxtaposition of those two events, one very beautiful and loving, and one terribly tragic and stark, was David's idea. And I'm not sure. I think it's open to different interpretations. I'm sure we don't have time now to go into that, but I think that is one of them. Absolutely, a valid interpretation of what that means. But we certainly weren't saying that we needed, we were condoning the murder, the sacrifice of Iphigenia in order for Helen to have a good, life. It was just the fact that what Helen had done, in a way, was while she was having a wonderful time, some of the consequences of her decisions were now being played out in other spaces. I think, without going into it in too much detail, I love that I do find that sequence very powerful.
Yes, and let me apologize. Of course, you guys are all right. It's episode 2. I was thinking of Odyssey book 4. I was thinking of Hermione. You know me, I'm just thinking in Greek all the time. No, I'm just kidding. I just got that wrong. And I think it was either Krishni or Amy in one of your articles, in one of your chapters, where you mentioned that it almost looked like the casting of the Chryseis figure, right, was sort of physically reminiscent of the actress who played Iphigenia too, so that Agamemnon's trauma carries through. And again, with the longer format, we can chart these psychological journeys that you're talking about, Derek, which is just so exciting, I think, for all of us to try and tease out all those resonances. So Emma, I see your hand up. Did you want to add something about the characters and their trauma? Your man Odysseus?
My man Odysseus, absolutely. Can you hear me okay? My computer chose this afternoon to die, so I'm on my phone, but hopefully you can hear me. One of the things which was really has been really fantastic about being involved in this project for me is the extent to which it's made me look at the whole Trojan War story from different points of view. Because I was concentrating on Odysseus, I've now, gone back to the whole thing, and I'm seeing it all from his point of view. Obviously, one's used to reading the Odyssey very much from Odysseus's point of view, but less so. I've gone back to the Iliad as well, and seen lots and lots of things in it which I hadn't necessarily seen before. So this is a really good example of reception studies actually driving you back to some of the text that it's kind of derived from. So that's brilliant. I obviously want to ask Derek about the chances of an Odyssey based sequel, because to me the final shots of episode 8 just screamed there's going to be an Odyssey sequel. So that's what I want to know.
Well, I think I just have to go back really to the I maybe it's a very subjective view, but I do think that the racist backlash did create a sense that it hadn't been as well received as it could have been, because those people were so determined to damn it. I mean, Netflix did commission a whole series outline, and David wrote an absolutely brilliant series outline for Odysseus. And we had lots of conversations with Joe Maul, who was a brilliant actor who really was keen to play him. I think he's just been in Amazon's Lord of the Rings at the moment. He's a really fantastic actor and really brought so much, a real method actor. If you think of Jeremy Strong in Succession, I think Joe Maul is in that sort of vein of intensity, and the way he approaches performance is so he gives everything to it. And he was absolutely superb. I think it was just the fact that we had such a backlash that maybe the Netflix got a bit of cold feet, but it was a real disappointment to us not to get a second series from them. Maybe there's another way forward with somebody else. Who knows? We'd love to have made a second series of the show. And David was very much excited by the possibility of it, but it does also work as a complete thing in itself, I suppose, because it does end with the fall of the city, etc. So we weren't banking on that, but we were hoping for it. But we were in the lap of the gods, as it were.
How apt! But that is really interesting, that the combination of the writing and the particularly brilliant actor brought so much complexity to that character, which as a classicist, and indeed I've been teaching the Odyssey this term, is to an extent there in the ancient texts as well. I mean, it's so hard to know whether Odysseus is a good guy or a bad guy, and it was brilliant to see that kind of brought to life.
Yes, I mean, he's a character with the most tragic conflict in the last episode, and we thought so long and hard about whether or not an audience would be able to cope with the death of a baby, of Astyanax, and going with that ending was pretty risky, we thought, and it was very hard, because we haven't seen Odysseus being that brutal, so we had to make that decision feel psychologically credible as well. We felt and tragic for him to have done it. And completely, you see his face at the end, and he is completely and utterly traumatized by what he's done at Agamemnon's insistence, I guess. I mean, it was, for me, that was a great final episode. And the director who did it is currently John Strickland, is a wonderful director who was the lead director on a series on Line of Duty, which is a hit British series. And I wanted him to do it, those last episodes, because he really brings fantastic psychological realism to everything he does. And he's currently the lead director on our current series for Amazon called The Rig, set on very different, not classical, but set on an oil rig in the North Sea. But John is just a terrific director, and I think that last episode is testament to that. He did the last two.
Yeah, I think that final scene with Odysseus. I mean, if the actor hadn't been so sympathetic and such a powerful actor, it was very, very traumatizing. Along with the Iphigenia sacrifice scene, the final scene is the one that gets so much comment online. Sort of trigger warnings and so forth. So we have another chapter in the book by Meredith Prince, who also talks about Odysseus. Both Emma, it's such a powerful character throughout the whole series. Both Emma's chapter and Meredith Prince's chapter talk about Odysseus and his psychological and very tragic conflict and his tragic journey. But we'll look forward to hopefully still having another series if the gods smile down on them.
I also saw Two Hands Up by Meredith.
Oh, I think they're
Meredith Safran.
I think they're dong now. It's 2 minutes to the
Kirsten,
hour, as
maybe.
they say on TV. Yeah, Kirsten, did you have your hand up or did you jump back down? We have time for maybe one more comment or question.
I realize we're running out of time. That's totally fine. If Meredith wants to say something, that's fine too.
Okay.
Or not.
I just want to say just briefly, just to thank you all for your amazing contributions. I mean, because I think that the essays are absolutely superb and really get into the detail and complexity of the story we tried to produce. They are really so incisive, and I'm really flattered and honoured that the book is coming out, about the show, that this book is coming out, and so I want to thank you all.
And thank you, Derek, for your forward and again giving us that background that not all of us do. I mean, it inspired me in my chapter about Aphrodite and Paris's relationship to actually meet with Lex King, the actor who played Aphrodite and who turned out to be a student of psychology, an actual psychologist herself, and really helped me to think through some of the choices that were made in terms of the presentation of the character and the storyline with Paris. So we really want to thank you also for opening our eyes to a different way of doing reception and making sure that we can always think about it from both sides of the camera as well. So
many
Anthony,
thanks to everyone who contributed to this volume, all the excellent contributors, wonderful essays. Looking forward to reading those again. And Monica and I know that we are teaching 2 different courses in our universities next semester. So maybe you guys can also teach Troy sometime soon.
Yes, so the book is coming out in paperback, so it will be very affordable, unlike most academic books. So in January, contributors, Bloomsbury is very cheap. You're only going to get one copy, one free copy, but I will send you the link for your author's discount, so you can buy a whole bunch of them for Valentine's Day presents. Here's my shameless selling now, right? I have a new career in public, what do you call it? Marketing? I don't even know. But yeah, so you can buy them at discount, but you can also order them for your classes. They will be in paperback. So we're super excited about that. So, all right, anybody else who's thinking about stuff, just feel free to write anytime and let us know. That was really good. Antony, are we going to let people go and chat for a little more?
Happy holidays to everyone.
Yep.
Happy holidays to everyone.